the aftermath of rivalry weekend, we are staring down conference championship weekend play here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Joined on a regular basis by Steve Dace from Michigan Podcast. So I encourage you to head on over there, pick out your favorite audio platform, or right here on a YouTube. Steve, how you doing tonight?
Oh, given how things went on Saturday, Mark, I'm actually doing pretty good. Thanks.
Okay. That is good to hear. There were many droves of comments coming in on a Saturday to my channel, both concerned about you, checking on your status. Then also, obviously, those other people a little less concerned, more just wanting to hear from you as quickly as possible following 56-27.
Well, I think that there's two separate conversations that come out of this game. I think the first thing that needs to happen and needs to be acknowledged. I mean, in the first half, Mark, Michigan averaged 9 yards a play, 8.91. 9 yards a play against, any form of a Power 5 team is pretty elite, let alone the number one ranked team in the country. Michigan was averaging 9 yards a play. Chase Young had an absolute goose egg, and the Wolverines trailed by 12 points. So I don't even know what to say to that. That's, you're averaging 9 yards a play against the number one team in the country. You have held the number one player in the country, according to some, certainly the number one NFL prospect, to a complete and total goose egg, and you're down by 12 points. I think that just speaks to the superiority of Ohio State as a football team. And I think that's got to be acknowledged first and foremost before we get into any, meta narratives of where the Michigan program is at and where things stand with that, which I'm happy to have that conversation. That's why I'm doing this tonight. But before we do that, though, that just needs to be acknowledged. I mean, this is, when you look at the analytic numbers from either a Jeff Sagarin or a Bill Conley at ESPN, we're in 2001 Miami territory with the analytics here. And a lot of people think 2001 Miami is the best college football team in history since 72 USC, or is right there with 93 Florida State. So we're talking historic levels of analytics. And so I don't, I think I want to be gracious here in acknowledging the superior team. So I wanted to say that first and foremost. That is, it's the best Big Ten team I've seen since Penn State in '94. And Penn State didn't have the kind of defense Ohio State has, but the offense that Penn State had, you're talking right there with 83 Nebraska in terms of all-time potency, the amount of talent, to me, I think you're taking a Penn State 94 level of offensive, convergence, and you're pairing it with, I think they're really good defensively. I don't think that we're dealing with, a historic level of defense, but when you're that great on offense, you don't have to be. So let's just say let's say, what would it have looked like in 1994 if Penn State had a top 10 defense in terms of total defense, instead of giving up well over 400 yards a game? It would look like this. So when you're averaging 9 yards a play, you're at home, and you've held Chase Young to a goose egg for probably the first time since he was in the 5th grade, and you're still down by 12 points. You just got to tip your cap to that. So I wanted to do that first and foremost.
Absolutely. I made the statement during our discussion last week that I was almost assured that Michigan was going to show up and play well. That doesn't mean mistake-free, but that means play unafraid, come in with a sound game plan, execute it most of the time, and give Ohio State a fight. Despite the final score, I think some of those boxes were checked, maybe not each and every one, and they certainly made two costly errors in the red zone in the first half. One in which Shea Patterson just simply took his eye off the snap, and it cost them dearly. Another one in which they could have gone for a 4th down, but chose to go the field goal route and make it a 28-16 game at half. and that's debatable as to whether that was the right decision to make. But they certainly made mistakes, but football is a game of mistakes. There's just too much going on out there for teams to be to get through the 60 minutes scot free, and so at 14-13, obviously it was competitive. Even at 28-16, it was competitive, and then for a brief glimpse at 42-27 after putting 2 scores on the board to make it a 2-score game. Maybe some of us that harken back to 93, 95, 96 and other games during the 80s felt a wee little bit of pressure at that point. But this is a really good Michigan football team. And when I say really good, I think it's one of the 10 or 12 best teams in the nation. And as you mentioned, the metrics are starting to play out and starting to come to a point in the season, which obviously we've completed all the regular season games, to be substantial in Ohio State's favor, despite playing the best teams on its schedule here the last few weeks, to where they continue to dominate at that level. I believe the total yardage was something in the 200-yard gap between about 550 and 350. And Shea Patterson, I thought the one takeaway that was obvious at the intermission, in addition to the Michigan mistakes, were that Shea Patterson was carving up that secondary. And we're talking about an NFL secondary that was minus Sean Wade, but every team's missing a substantial player or two. So I don't think that was any excuse for Ohio State. I just think that Michigan's offensive line was handling, in addition to Chase Young, who's on another level in terms of that defensive front, but the rest of those guys are no slouches either. They're going to play on Sundays. And that secondary that's elite, that Michigan's wide receivers were having their way, and Shea Patterson was delivering the ball through a couple passes that were some of the best passes I've ever seen him throw. And they really, with 250 yards passing in the first half, should have had more than 16 points on the board.
Well, I think that's a good transition, I think, to the larger conversation of where things stand with the Michigan program. And so we have completed year 5 of the Harbaugh era. And just to kind of set the stage here, the season before Jimmy arrived, Michigan was literally giving tickets away with the purchase of a Coke Zero. We had just lost to Maryland and Rutgers in the same season. We had spent a decade where we averaged just over 7 wins a year. So this was a program that was probably as low as it could go given its resources, reach, and revenue. And in the 5 years he's been here, Mark, Michigan has been ranked in the AP top 10 more times in the 5 years he's been here than it was the decade before he arrived. Michigan is top 10 in the country in total wins in the 5 years that he's been here. We have been beyond scandal free. I don't even recall an off the field issue with a player. And our APR has improved quite a bit, which is very important to a good portion of Michigan's fans, but certainly the administration. When you're ranked the #1 public university in the world, that's part of your brand too. All right. So those things are tremendous. And what he's done, putting the program back on the map and making it relevant, cannot be questioned. The thing with Harbaugh is he is both overrated and unfairly criticized at the exact same time, though. Because if you would have told any Michigan fan, hell, I would venture to guess, Mark, if you would have told any Ohio State fan on December 30th, 2014, when he was hired, that Jimmy would go 0-5 against Ohio State, including 2 of the worst losses for Michigan in the history of the series, not win a Big Ten title, not even win the division title once, and would go 2-10 against top 10 teams, I would imagine almost nobody, regardless of who they root for, that is going to be listening to this, would have said that was even remotely possible. And that is where we are. And I can't think of a program in the modern era that is in the position Michigan is in. And here's why. Because of the playoff. You could sustain 9-10 type of win seasons over and over and over again in the BCS system, because only 2 teams made it. It was a really subjective system. Of course, this one is as well. But since we use the word playoff and there's more teams, there's a notion that it's more objective when it's really not. But, we had this subjective system with all these computers. We didn't have a Big Ten championship game, so you could still share championships. All that is gone now. And that changes a lot of your fans' perceptions of where your program is at. And I think that what's going to be a challenge for him now is he's exceeded the reach of the new coach selling hope and hype and persona and brand. And now to recruits. And now it's about selling results. And as long as he can continue to recruit, where every year there are 8 to 15 in the country, then you could sustain this level of success into perpetuity. I mean, you won't get better than Ohio State, but you could be one of the top 10 or 12 teams in the country every year, get to a New Year's Six bowl most of those years, and continue with this level. But can you do that? I think that's the question, and we don't know the answer to that. And I think that I want us to discuss some of the tropes that are out there among my fellow Michigan fans. And I wrote a column about this tonight for Wolverine Digest, that's part of the SI.com network. That I think that the biggest problem here is Jim Harbaugh. And I think it remains to be seen whether he's the solution. And I want to give your audience 4 examples that I cite in my column tonight that indicate what I'm talking about, but while recognizing that I'm very thankful for what he's done to rebuild our program. I want to start with number 1. Jimmy played for a coach. If you fumbled one time, you didn't see the field again the rest of the night. You're out the rest of the game. And, there's a few plays in this game. Tariq Black on a key 3rd and 8 or 3rd and 10 runs a 7-yard route and then doesn't fight for the first down and goes out of bounds. And he's done that. That's not the first time he's made plays like that, by the way, in his career. Why is he he's even in the game and Nico Collins is not? I can't answer that question. You're sitting there with your senior captain, Khaleke Hudson, who is watching. He's right on the ball. He's watching the ball. And then he jumps off sides one of the few times your defense is going to get off the field. He's committed a myriad of dumb penalties in his career. I'm watching Josh Metellus deciding in the 4th quarter tackling is optional. That's another one of your captains. Your senior quarterback just drops a snap, so you have an empty possession in the red zone. Nobody plays mistake-free. Whenever I hear an announcer say, well, you've got to play a perfect game, I just turn it off right in the middle of that statement because I know they're just not serious. No one plays a perfect game. I promise you, Ryan Day watching the film of Saturday, ran down at least a baker's dozens of mistakes and MAs that his team made. No one plays a perfect game. All right, that's ridiculous. But you cannot continuously shoot yourself in the foot like that. Hold on. I think Khaleke Hudson just let J.K. Dobbins break contain again, just as we're sitting here talking tonight. This is the kind of stuff, by the way, that happened against Wisconsin. And Jimmy came out. He was all fiery. We can't have that at Michigan. Nobody got benched. Klatt and Gus Johnson were talking about how Josh Gaddis was so furious with his receivers for all the drops in the second half that after one possession, when they came off the field, he went over and gave Shea Patterson a high five and didn't say a word to him. Very next possession, those exact same receivers just went right back out there on the field. There's a message board insider that says a pretty marginal player at Michigan. His parents are malcontents off the field. They go on to social media settings and diss the program and spread rumors. And they were the source of the rumor that Zach Charbonnet was going to be out for the year with the knee scope because an Ohio State writer was in this group and saw them say it. Let's just say all that's true. Why the hell is that guy in your program more than 5 minutes? Can you only imagine what Bo would have done if he would have found out your parents were popping off about the program? I know what he would have done. He would have asked you, son, you ever wondered what Mount Pleasant, Michigan is like and how you'd look in a Central Michigan uniform? Well, I bring you glad tidings of great joy, brother. You are about to find out. Have a nice life. Jimmy is not the merciless, ruthless coach that his brand says. They tolerate way too much of this kind of mess, way too much. And the reality is he's actually a pretty quirky, nice guy. He's not the ruthless, merciless coach that at least maybe he was at Stanford and maybe he was with the 49ers. He really has not been that here. That's number one. Those are your leaders doing mistakes like that and killing you like that. And they've made these kinds of mistakes before, and there wasn't any consequence for it. Here's number two. So my message board or my inbox, message box, and DMs today and Twitter feeds are loaded with Ohio State cheats here or there. By the way, I looked it up. Ohio State had a higher APR last year than Michigan did. Both were very good, but Ohio State was actually a couple points higher. I believe the only real problem off the field Urban Meyer had at Ohio State, unlike Florida, was Zach Smith. I don't think he had any other off the field problems that I can remember. But let's just grant this point. For the sake of argument, let's grant this point that Ohio State is cheating. If you really believe that, instead of making passive-aggressive comments to John U. Bacon, hard to beat the cheaters, or posting, scurrilous, references and, what is that about on Twitter? Call the freaking NCAA or put it on, let everybody see the evidence. Bo Schembechler turned Illinois in back in the day when they were cheating. Woody Hayes turned Michigan State in back in the 70s. That's why they didn't go to a Rose Bowl in 1978. If you're not going to do that, shut the hell up and stop whining. Because, those kinds of passive-aggressive whines are what you do when you don't have the balls to do what needs to be done, or you're looking for an excuse. And oh, by the way, can I just say this on a higher level? In no other context in all of human existence is it considered unethical to pay for people to pay and support people less fortunate than you than NCAA rules. Let's just say Ohio State was cheating. J.K. Dobbins' mother almost aborted him. His dad died. If some Ohio State, I've known Tony Alford for years, going back to when he was the running backs coach at Iowa State. That's your running back coach. I love him, by the way. Great dude. Great guy. Let's say Tony Alford is like, dude, man, J.K. Dobbins' mom needs the heat paid. It's wintertime. In any other context, would it be considered immoral if Tony Alford paid J.K. Dobbins' mother's heat bill because she couldn't afford it? No. The only place in all of human existence that's not a laudable act and celebrated and commended for your good Samaritan, support and charitable giving is NCAA rules. They're just dumb and stupid. Who freaking cares? All right. So the argument in and of itself is stupid. But if it's true and you really think that these people are cheating, turn their asses in. Stop whining about this kind of stuff. That's, by the way, Brandon Brown, who works for me over at Wolverine Digest for years. He covered recruiting for Rivals and was the chief recruiting reporter for the Wolverine. You know what he told me today? Boy, when I covered recruiting full time, we'd hear about all the schools that were cheating all the time. Ohio State actually never came up. So there you go. All right. So this is the stuff of pathetic losers. Number 3, I love Carlo Kemp. But you're out there untying a guy's shoe. What, dude? Go play at Michigan State with that. That's beneath the dignity of a winged helmet. I don't even know what to say to something like that. I'm just embarrassed as a Michigan fan, and I got to tell you, I was loaded with messages from Michigan fans that were embarrassed by it as well. That's just beneath the dignity of the all-time winningest program. And Carlo's a really smart young man. And I don't know what that was. Okay, but that's as douche-tastically Bush League as it gets. That. I mean, short of trying to hurt somebody, that it's just stupid. And that's beneath the dignity of who we are as a program. And so I'm wondering what kind of culture creates that. You'd have tried that stuff playing for Bo or Moeller or Lloyd. You'd have learned what Rhodes Scholarship meant at Michigan, as in hit the road. We don't do that here. Go play down the street in East Lansing. They need to do stuff like that. I wonder about, Ryan Van Bergen, a former Michigan player, has a podcast out today with the Michigan Rivals site at the Wolverine. that addresses some of the stuff I'm talking about right here, and from a former player's perspective as well. And then the other thing I would mention, the game management situation. You talked about the field goals that Jim kicked there. Jimmy is out here still playing. It's year 5, and he is still playing like this NFL possession game where he's like counting possessions. Like, we're going to get a bunch of stops. Dude, Nick Saban can't do that anymore. That's why Tua's throwing 60 times a game. I mean, Nick Saban couldn't stop Auburn from getting 45 points, and their quarterback with sub 50% completions. That's not today's college football. And, those field goals did nothing. I mean, they added nothing. And I get maybe why you kick one of them. You don't want an empty possession. You're worried about that. Fine. But you kick 2. So congratulations. We made a 3-score game, None of that made any sense. And there's been lots of game management situations like this with Jimmy throughout the course of his career that he's tried to adapt to it being a college game. He's made a lot of changes. Josh Gaddis is one of them. But in game, there's still way too much of treating this like it's an NFL. It's not the NFL, man. It's not. If you cannot score 40 on elite teams, your chances of beating them, unless you have an historically great defense, are not good. And Michigan doesn't have one of those. So I think, there's an old story about Bear Bryant, Mark, that one day he needed something, and he called over to the Auburn football offices early in the morning, and nobody answered in the middle of May. And the legend says he then told his secretary, that's why they can't beat us. Nobody's home. Nobody's working. We're working. They're not. I love the foreign trips and stuff we take our players on. I think those are great for developing them as young men. But what do you think Urban Meyer and Ryan Day are doing while Jimmy's playing travel agent? What do you think they're doing? And plotting out, 3-week African safaris. What do you think those guys are doing? What do you think those guys are doing when Jimmy's, planning out the segments for his weekly podcast with his old man? What do you think those guys are doing? Can you imagine what would happen if a podcast company came to Nick Saban and said, "Hey, what do you think of a weekly podcast?" Nick Saban would say, "Hey, man, do you know anything about a broken hip? Because I had one a little while ago. Here, let me show you what that feels like." What is that? And I think that's where, at some point, and this is an old Bo saying, and he has this plaque in his office: just coach the team. And you know what? I don't know, maybe your audience isn't aware of this, but one of the most depressed areas in this hemisphere happens to be right down the road from Ann Arbor. If you want to serve a community, you want to teach young people about the need to serve and diverse cultures and things of that nature, head on down I-94. They need a lot of help there in the city of Detroit. I think that where this has gone, off the rails is, in the end, he's not the ruthless coach that took Stanford from primordial ooze to pounding USC into submission. He's not. And now he's dealing with Ohio State has cracked the code of what, Alabama has done, and Clemson cracked that code. And so now Ohio State is a fully armed and operational battle station. And, if he was in any other league, he could do all this in the Big 12 that we're talking about. This same program that we're talking about that he built, if he was in the Big 12, he could win that league almost every year. If he was in the Pac-12, he could win that league almost every year. The problem is he's not in those two leagues. If he was Notre Dame in an independent where he could complete his own schedule, could be in the playoff every couple of years. The problem is, though, that he's not. And so I don't know what the solution is. Ultimately, though, if you want to beat who's beating you, you've got to emulate what they're beating you with to the best of your ability. This is what Bo did when he took over the program. I mean, he carbon copied everything about Woody Hayes in Ohio State. That's why he earned the nickname Little Woody. Bill McCartney, one of Bo's great assistant coaches, did the same thing when he took over at Colorado. He totally emulated Nebraska's program. All right. And I think that, right now in the middle of May, we're doing podcasts And, we're looking at Lions on the Serengeti while Ohio State is figuring out, how good its fourth string tight end is. And I think that's the difference. And yes, there's a talent gap, but Mark, Clemson has one more 4- and 5-star recruit on its roster than Michigan does. Did you know that? One more. That's all it has. There is a talent gap, man, 1 through 85. The last I checked, you don't play 85 guys at a time. Do you, Mark? Do you play? How much time do you think Ryan Day is spending with Ohio State's third string offensive line during the season? I'll answer for you. None. None. There's more than enough talent to not give up 118 points the last 2 years. So I really think this comes down to one program has committed fully to maximizing all of its assets. And now, what's funny is Michigan fans like to talk, Ohio State, actually, it's not as good of a school as Michigan, but it's considered one of the top 40 schools in the country now. They've even improved their academic reputation. I just don't like excuses. So if you think they're paying players, turn them in. If you don't want to turn them in, I don't know why you don't pay players. Who the hell cares? The only people that care about NCAA rules are the schools that obey them. Don't put thugs on campus. Don't cheat the academic mission in the university. Who the hell cares about buying a single mom a car, or buying a kid that grew up in, essentially, an Eastern European war zone, buying him a nice suit and a car? Nobody cares. At least they shouldn't. I mean, that's charity. I don't care about any of these excuses. I just want to win. And I think that Jim's got to decide if he's willing to do what it will take to win. And he's been willing to do a lot of things, but this is the final step. Is he willing to go back to being a ruthless coach? And if he's not, we're going to see there'll be years where, like 2011, maybe a quarterback gets hurt, there's a suspension or something, and Michigan lucks out. But the era will not change. The rivalry is dead. I don't know that it will ever come back. So that's sort of my big picture view. Sorry about the rant.
No, we have you on here for the rant. The rant is much better than the answers to the questions that I would ask. I will say that I appreciate not just the rant, but I appreciate what small ownership you would need or don't need to take for the Carlo Kemp action. So, because most fans in America are quick to make excuses for their players, their teams, and that's because they hold too much of an identity, self-worth to the teams that they root for. Therefore, when something like that happens, they have to make excuses. I recalled as you were outlining that Ohio State player back in 2000, I believe the year was 2003 at Wisconsin, gouging the neck of Jim Sorgi, the Wisconsin.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And that was a despicable act that, again, every fan base will do this. To some portion of the fan base will come to the rescue in the defense of that particular player, just because you can't show any kind of disloyalty, or you can't have your team or your players called into question and held accountable, which is ridiculous, of course. Because if that happened all the time in Michigan, I think that would be a certainly would show the true colors of the program, but it doesn't. So that's an individual acting out for some strange reason, because based on everything that you told me and based on everything I've heard surrounding the incident, that Kemp has been, aside from that situation, a stand-up athlete and student athlete off the field.
Mm-hmm. He's one of the best we have. Absolutely. Which was what I think blew a lot of people away to see it, and to see it out in the open, to see Khaleke Hudson look at the ball and then still jump off sides. I think to watch Donovan Peoples-Jones made a catch last week against Indiana. That's an all-timer. And he dropped, 3 or 4 passes in this game, all of them extremely catchable. At this point, we're in helmet game territory. And, I know a lot of Michigan fans were like, oh, it's great when they saw Khaleke Hudson come out with the Greg Madison shirt. I thought, we're in trouble. And you know why? Because he had a chance to address this in the press conference during the week and took the high road, which I wouldn't have done. If I felt like Greg Madison betrayed me, and he did, I'd just say so. But don't take the high road and then come out with a traitor shirt after that. Okay? So because here's again what that tells me. That's a culture issue. Who are you as a program? What is your identity? What do you do? What are you about? And that tells me that you're too smart by a half, if you remember that old expression. And I think that, most years of my lifetime, Ohio State has been more talented than Michigan. Ohio State's always put more guys in the NFL than Michigan. But Mark, here's the thing. Do you know when the last time Michigan had a skill player chosen in the first round of the NFL draft? Do you know who it was?
Let me think. Braylon Edwards comes to mind. Let me see.
That's who it is, Mark. It's Braylon Edwards. Can you believe that?
Okay.
That was the 2005 NFL draft.
Hmm.
How is that possible? We don't have any. Our only defensive tackles are freshmen. They were both very highly recruited, but they weren't ready to play this year. How is that possible? That's, by the way, it's the most important position in college football. That is the one that separates the elite programs from the pretty good, defensive tackle. We're in year 5. He hasn't recruited and developed one quarterback yet in 5 years. We haven't had a first round skill player taken the whole time he's been here, and we haven't had one since 2005. And we don't have any defensive tackles this year. See, that's where that's where the gap is. Ohio State was the more talented team in 1995, but we had a Timbiaka Batuka who could run for 300 yards. Ohio State was the more talented team in 1997, but we had Charles Woodson. Ohio State was the more talented team in 1996, but Ty Streets could make a cut that crossed up a Sean Springs who tripped, fell down, and take it to the house. Who are those guys on this team? On the last 15 years of teams? I mean, the last time we had a running back make an NFL roster, I believe, was Fitz Toussaint, and before that, Mike Hart. So, that's again where the trenches are really important. Ohio State dominated there, but this is kind of a cobbled together Ohio State line. 4 new starters, one of them a grad transfer from Rutgers. This is where our mindset is from another era. We've got like 18 offensive linemen on scholarship right now. And our best running back was a 2-star recruit out of Kansas City, Hassan Haskins. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Okay? I think that we just have to understand, Michigan is like a lot of major corporations. Once they become venerable, there's this idea that the world works the way you see it, rather than you have to change what you see based on how it actually works. And I think, and can I say one more thing too?
Of course.
Man, I love my favorite team, but I really don't want to hear any high and mighty talk about hard to beat the cheaters when a member of the Fab Five is our basketball coach now. Are really? I mean, I don't self-awareness much. Come on, man. We got Chris Webber on the sideline Saturday, and we're talking about hard to beat the cheaters. What in the Sam Hill are you talking about with that crap? I just find that dumb. And I don't have any tolerance for that kind of stuff any more than I had any tolerance for what happened with Zach Smith or any of that stuff. Now, I'm not saying that it's Ed Martin paying guys is morally equivalent to what the knuckle dragger Zach Smith is, but it's just ridiculousness. Don't get me hard to beat the cheaters when a guy from the Fab Five, who, by the way, I love the Fab Five. I mean, I didn't care how much money Ed Martin paid those guys. I mean, most of them came from poor neighborhoods. Why do I care? But you run into that kind of tunnel vision when you believe that the world is how you see it, rather than changing what you see based on how the world actually is.
Jim Tressel's legacy appears to be taking this rivalry and putting it on the rails for Ohio State and changing the approach and the mindset that John Cooper brought, which was to recruit an NFL team, but treat this like any other game. And of course, that's a fine line to draw because you don't want to psych out or make your kids paranoid. You want to instill them with pride and the weight of the rivalry in a positive direction. And then Urban Meyer, obviously, based on all his other uh, coaching acumen, in addition to being an Ohioan, understanding the rivalry, being an Earl Bruce disciple, seemed to be and was obviously, by the record, the perfect replacement for Jim Tressel. Again, on a number of levels, that you would think that Jim Harbaugh would have been the perfect selection as a counter to that, based on his ability to do it on the field against the Scarlet and Gray, his head coach, and his track record in other stops. But that hasn't turned out to be the case.
No, it hasn't. And I don't know unless he's willing to be as ruthless with this program as he was to get a program like Stanford that was on life support, that had the longest streak without a bowl game in college football when he took it over. Or the second longest streak to Baylor, I should say. So unless he's willing to be that level of ruthless in what he tolerates from a culture standpoint, internal standpoint, from his assistants, etc., then, it's the old Einstein, definition of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over again every time. So if we continue as we have been, we'll continue to get the same results. And Michigan may decide that that's good enough, and it may be. I don't know. I don't know if you can consistently recruit as good as they have, without being able to provide on the field results for players. Maybe they can. I don't know. And I think if you can, then you keep going with it, because I do believe there's enough resources, reach, and revenue here that you could take a young grinder like a Matt Campbell or a Matt Rule, that kind of a guy who kind of comes up from the dirt road, and you could turn him into the next Bo Schembechler with what Michigan brings to the table. But identifying the right fit there is a pretty high risk proposition. And if you fail, well, if you think you're behind now, you can fall. You go from light years to interdimensional. So I think if you're Michigan, provided Harbaugh can continue to recruit at this level, you keep plugging away at it. And then at some point, you have to hope somebody says to him, "You're going to have to be a bigger prick around here. This is too easy from a culture standpoint. Guys are too comfortable making mistakes. There's too much of Jim Harbaugh, the brand and the fun lover, and we need more of Jim Harbaugh, some hair of the dog Nazareth, Jim Harbaugh." More and you know what? I was ecstatic. We talked a few weeks ago. We were starting to see more of that. What's your deal, Jimmy? The way they really just poured it on Notre Dame, throwing the ball on him, dunking all over him. Gosh, I love that. We saw more of that against Michigan State. But what we saw against the Ohio State game is Michigan came out and threw it the first punch, and it was a good one. Ohio State came back, threw 3 or 4 more. Michigan kind of threw another punch or two. And Ohio State kept punching. And Michigan kind of just said, "Yeah, not going to happen." And you really saw that with the way they didn't really challenge or try or ever take the momentum back after halftime. And I think that kind of tells you where they were at mentally and culturally at that point, which was defeated.